So the last activity for the day is all about risks, and I always start by talking to the kids about a risk and a risk that they might take, and do they understand really what a risk is. I usually use one of two examples. I use curfew, and I start to ask them, how many of you guys have a curfew? And they'll, bicker, no, you don't have curfew, yes, I have curfew, blah, blah, blah. And I talk about the risks of, well, what happens if you stay out past curfew, right? What are the consequences? You might not be able to go out next weekend. Sometimes they don't have consequences, sometimes that doesn't work based on who you have. So another thing I often talk about is speeding, right? And the risk, you could get into an accident, they could get pulled over, but again, that might not happen all the time. So I try to go through a variety of examples to really show risk versus consequence, and then I also try to spin it around that sometimes taking risks can actually pay off and have a bigger benefit for them. So if to the kid going to college might seem like a risk because no one in their family did that, what could they possibly get out of it at the end of the day? Or taking a risk in starting their own business. Could they go around and mow lawns this summer? Could they go around and shovel driveways, right? It might be a risk, but they could have a positive consequence. So I talk about that for a while. The recommended exercise is this risk scenario game, and when I've done this over weekly courses, I have done this game. When I do this in JA in a day, I don't do that game. I just think the kids are a little more excited that day. It's not a class, no exercise day, and they would just get a little too unruly for me, kind of in my experience, and I think we'd go way off track. So what I do is I have them in the workbook. It's this year in the life of just in case, and they always usually laugh at the name. And I tell them to open here, and then I talk about insurance and how insurance is a way to mitigate your risks that are out there. Spend a lot of time talking about insurance. And then I have them do the exercise where they're supposed to figure out whether or not they bought insurance if they had got into a car accident or if they had somebody break into their apartment, whether or not at the end of the day they would have more or less money in their pocket. This is a really hard one. I think it's the hardest one because it lists out numbers, and then the kids are supposed to go in and understand deductibles and premium and even percentage claims. Like you mentioned earlier, these kids, a lot of them don't know how to use a calculator. But then you're also going to have the ones that are pulling out the big, huge scientific calculator that I don't even know how to turn on. And I try to encourage them to help their peers to do it, because this will be the second time we've used calculators. And they go through it. And then, depending upon the class, sometimes I'll just do the exercise on the board, and we'll do it together that way. If I have a lot more time, if I'm running out of time, if I have time, I let them do it in the groups. But again, I think this one's really important to walk around, and if the best thing that they get out of that is learning how to use a calculator, I think that was fabulous. So that's how I teach that course.